there, everyone. Welcome back to Utility Sports, and I'm really excited for today's video. I know we haven't been posting as frequently, but the content is about to pick up big time yet again, so I'm really excited. And this is the first time we've actually been recording a video like this, where we're going to look at fantasy football, and no better person to join me here than our fantasy football expert and multi-time league champion, Austin Host. Austin, we're glad to have you in here. We're in a sleeper league right now where we're looking at a 12-team PPR snake draft. And Austin, we do not have a draft spot yet, but there's a big controversy going around right now about where certain teams should look to draft at certain spots. What pick should we use in this mock draft?
I believe we should use pick 2 because that has been a huge concern in the community. There's a lot of different people that have a lot of different opinions on who should go number 2. And just to preface this mock draft in particular, this is a full point PPR format. We have 12 teams, and that's the basis of the draft. So that's something to note here. And we're going to be drafting against the general ADP, all the computers and what people have been drafting within the sleeper community. So that's how these picks will be determined.
Obviously, and first overall here, we're going to start the draft, and we're guessing Jonathan Taylor goes, which is exactly what we see here. Jonathan Taylor is the first overall selection, as he would be in most leagues. So Austin, here we are, we're on the clock. We got 3 minutes with Jonathan Taylor off the board. First of all, is he your consensus number 1 player going into fantasy this year? Second of all, how does it feel to have him in our dynasty league? And third of all, who do we look at now at this spot?
Yeah, I think when you are looking at pick number 2, you have to consider a lot of the players that are, in that top 5 realm for sure, top 6 even. But in this scenario, it's tough to not look at Derrick Henry and also Christian McCaffrey as the 2 front runners. And for me, I don't think you should really shy away from Christian McCaffrey. We know that this offense is going to lean on him heavily, and I think that's not a secret at all. Yes, he's had some injury concerns, but if you let that play into this year and you don't take him, and he's the Christian McCaffrey that we all know he can be, it's just going to be a really bad look on your part. And sometimes in fantasy football, to win, you need to take some chances. Even though it doesn't feel like as big of a risk with Christian McCaffrey, a lot of people see that as being a risk that is not worth taking at all at pick number 2. Derrick Henry, he's going to see a ton of volume this year. There's no secret about it, but Christian McCaffrey is going to be the heartbeat of not only the rushing part of the offense, but also in the passing game. A lack of playmakers overall in Carolina is going to lead to a big amount of, target share for Christian McCaffrey.
Yeah, I think you're right here, Austin. When you look at Christian McCaffrey, he's a player who the last couple of years has been consensus the number 1 player up until Jonathan Taylor's breakout season this past year with the Colts. And now we leave McCaffrey here second overall. I think it is clearly between those 2 guys, but for the reasons you stated, let's go ahead and take Christian McCaffrey here. I think the upside is so immense, especially in the passing game in a PPR league. And interestingly enough, we see Henry fall to 5th. As we're going through here now, we're seeing a lot of really good names coming off the board here at this spot. You can see exactly who's going where at which spots as we go throughout this entire process. Now, Austin, this is really where we get down to a point where we look at what's available here and really how do you want to build this team out? We already have our RB1. Are you keen on going out and getting an RB2 here? We see a guy like Leonard Fournette who supposedly came into training camp overweight and doesn't really look the part anymore. Or do you go with maybe a tight end and grab one of the best at a position that's rather thin? Or do you start to get a wide receiver here too in a PPR league? Of course, receptions are so important.
Yeah, I think when you're at this spot in the draft, this is a weird dead zone, in my opinion. At the end of round 2 is where you start to see some significant drop off. However, CeeDee Lamb is a super conducive option. He's going to take another step forward this year. That Dallas Cowboy offense is really going to be leaning on the passing game, and I don't think that's really going to be a secret. So CeeDee Lamb definitely at the top of your list. You also have Mark Andrews as an option, Kyle Pitts, who's going to see a ton of targets in that Atlanta Falcons offense. A couple of other guys like Zeke and James Conner are available. For the sake of where we're at right here, I'm not wanting to take Leonard Fournette. I have a lot of questions about what he's going to be this year, and Tampa Bay looks like they're going to be rotating some running backs. So with that being said, I'm going to go ahead and take CeeDee Lamb here with this pick.
I love that there, CeeDee Lamb. We know how important that wide receiver 1 position is in a PPR league. You're getting a guy who's high volume, high usage, high yardage type of player in CeeDee Lamb, who I think is really going to have a big season this next year, which leaves us now with another NFC East wide receiver available in AJ Brown. In his first year in Philly, he could look like an intriguing option. Otherwise, if we want to touch the tight end spot, lock that up. Kyle Pitts is here. We both really like Kyle Pitts. So Austin, now at this spot with your championship pedigree, when you're trying to build out your team, what are you looking at here? Do you want to really lock in that wide receiver spot and have your 1-2 in the fold, or where are you looking?
Yeah, so really it only comes down to me between Kyle Pitts and AJ Brown. Mike Evans is a tough one sometimes because of how touchdown dependent he can be. AJ Brown should see quite a bit of volume, holistically speaking. Kyle Pitts, though, this is a guy that he is going to have to take a huge target share jump. But once again, we don't know what that offense is going to look like with Marcus Mariota at the helm. So I'm gonna be a little hesitant there, and I'm gonna go ahead and select a guy like AJ Brown.
I think that's a phenomenal pick, especially when you look at Kyle Pitts last year. Obviously, the yardage is there, but he only scored 1 touchdown and now has regressed in terms of the QB throwing to him. Obviously, I expect still a monster year from Kyle Pitts. No slander to him at all. He's a phenomenal young talent who's multi-positional, could probably play him out wide as a wide receiver even. But when you look at him, just from a fantasy perspective, the touchdowns might not be there. That offense might not be moving the ball as much and leaves you kind of in a dead zone in terms of what's going to be your production week in, week out, especially if he's not scoring big time touchdowns when there's other tight ends still available. Which now we get to this spot. Now this is where it gets really weird because there's a collection of good wide receivers, and then we get to one of the most polarizing players in all of fantasy football this year, and that's Josh Jacobs. Of course, McDaniels there, known for rotating a ton of running backs in and out. Austin, are you betting against Josh Jacobs going into this year? We also see J.K. Dobbins and Lamar Jackson. So this is really the polarizing part of the draft.
Yeah, this is where it's going to be won or lost for you in your fantasy drafts. And that's been stated throughout time. Once you get into this, you can really make or break your draft. Now, generally speaking, looking at what's on the board here, DK Metcalf's obviously a very interesting player, but considering his current quarterback situation, how is that going to overall affect things? They're not going to be picking up as many first downs. Overall, his yardage numbers should probably regress. However, maybe DK Metcalf becomes the new favorite target for Drew Lock and sees a ton of volume, but you're really banking on that part of it. To me, I think that you also have to consider J.K. Dobbins as being a really good option in Lamar Jackson, both out of Baltimore. Now, J.K. Dobbins is one of those guys that's super efficient when he has the ball. So that's something that you have to lean on. And I'm going to go ahead and select J.K. Dobbins, surprisingly. Josh Jacobs, like to your point, you had mentioned that might be a problem if you are, an owner of Josh Jacobs, is you could see some more Zamir White touches. Amir Abdullah is going to be stealing some touches in this offense. Brandon Bolden as well. We've seen this historically with New England. So let's not reinvent the wheel. Let's go ahead, stick with Dobbins. And now this is the really fun part of it, because we still have some optionality here. Do you want to take a Lamar Jackson, a Joe Burrow at the quarterback position, or do you feel you can wait? For me, personally speaking, I've always been the guy that's going to wait on a quarterback, but I'm going to take Lamar Jackson here with this pick, with his ability to run the football and produce at a high level in fantasy. People forget how good this guy is. His injuries last year, definitely hurt his fantasy stock, but this is a guy that was worth taking for me. And Sheldon, you know me as well as anyone. I'm not a guy that takes quarterbacks.
Right. I know you're not. And it's funny because for me, even when you took J.K. Dobbins, I would have really strongly considered Lamar Jackson there. And that's something when you're in your own leagues, you're going to have to consider the teams picking around you. Of course, we're just dealing with the CPU here. So we have a better idea of maybe where they're looking. But had we lost out on Lamar Jackson, you're losing out on probably the QB leading rusher, which is highly important for fantasy. He's basically a running back as a QB in terms of the statistics he puts up. He's going to get you a ton of touchdowns, both through the air and on the ground. He's a very productive fantasy football player. However you feel about him on the field himself, the fantasy numbers are there. He is top 10 every single year he's healthy, and even higher than that most years because he is that dominant and dynamic. The only reason that you maybe wouldn't have taken him there is if you felt like you had a shot to get Kyler Murray a little bit later. But luckily, we did not do that. As you can see, Kyler Murray no longer on the board for us here. Actually went 3 picks before this spot. So now we got 2 minutes here, Austin. we're out of the QB race. We've got our 2 running backs in McCaffrey, Dobbins. We've got our QB. We've got our 2 wideouts in CD and also AJ Brown. So at this spot, I really want to know where you want to go here. I think you've actually been pioneering a really great draft. We do not have a tight end yet. I see Dallas Goedert here. Do you want to double up on Philly pass catchers? What's your thoughts here?
Yeah, if you go back to all, I'm definitely considering tight end here for sure. But I'm actually looking at, maybe taking another wide receiver, which is kind of surprising. I'm going to end up taking Juju Smith-Schuster. I think when you are having to replace as many targets as Tyreek Hill had in that Kansas City offense, it's going to have to go somewhere. Do I believe in the overall core of, their wide receiving core? They got Sky Moore, they have Juju. There's a lot of question marks at the receiver position, but there's going to be high volume. They're going to move the ball a lot, and that's why Juju makes a lot of sense to me. And now you can kind of come around here and think about, all right, where do we want to go? Do we want to get the tight end? Do we want to go ahead and take a risk? I'm actually going to go with DeAndre Hopkins. I'm going to try to survive the weeks that he's out and have an absolute monster coming off of my bench at the wide receiver position.
That will be crazy. You're looking at like a week 9 addition here, basically off the waiver wire. It's going to feel like when you're able to reinsert DeAndre Hopkins. And I think with the talent on our team right now, if we get a healthy Lamar, a healthy Christian McCaffrey, which is really where the risk is, a healthy J.K. Dobbins, right now we've got 3 players that we're going to rely on that maybe aren't, fully healthy, but they've also been given some time to recover. And hopefully going into this next season, they're going to be able to perform at their peak. And if they do, we've got some real steals here. I think Dobbins, McCaffrey, Lamar are a trio that you can win a league with. And we have CeeDee Lamb and AJ Brown on top of that with Smith-Schuster and DeAndre Hopkins coming off the bench. Definitely really good bang for our buck there with that DeAndre Hopkins pick, especially toward the end of the season. He's going to be healthy coming off of the suspended list. We know what he's going to be capable of doing. And now at this spot, Austin, we still have not touched tight end. We do have our 2 flex positions though. Also kicker, defense, the only 2 spots that are starting that we do not have addressed yet up to this point, in addition to that tight end spot. Here's some of the best tight ends available here, which is where we start to see some real issues with what's really available to us. What's your plan of attack here now at this spot? Do we go for depth, or do we have to hammer that tight end spot?
This is the point where you can really tie yourself up if you don't take a tight end here, because you're left with a bunch of tier 3 tight ends at this point after, some of probably the top 3 guys there. If you're not able to land a Knox, Freiermuth, or Gesicki, you're really going to have to be, stretching on taking a tight end. So I'm super happy Dawson Knox is still here, because that's who I want to go with. Once again, this Buffalo offense is a consistent mover, and Dawson Knox has a knack for finding the end zone. And that's why I think we should take him right here with this selection.
Definitely see the touchdown value. Dawson Knox is who we'll go with, Austin. Just for our viewers here, talk about Mike Gesicki. Do we think he has a bigger year this year now with Tyreek Hill, Jalen Waddle both there? Does that open up the middle of the field for him a little bit?
I mean, it can go 2 ways. You can look at it in the sense of all of a sudden more of the target share is going to be going to Tyreek Hill. However, they're going to be extending drives. They're going to have longer drives. And, maybe that opens up some red zone opportunities for Freiermuth, which Waddle and Tyreek Hill are not red zone threats. So you could actually, for me, looking at it, I think it's a huge plus. And I think his value should increase because of that.
I think so as well. I fall in that same camp. I do think Dawson Knox, though, is the right selection just with where we were at on the board. And here now, I know we do have our second flex, but DeAndre Hopkins, again, will not be available the first half of the season here in fantasy. So do we want to go out and find a wide receiver or a running back to fill in that actual flex spot for us? There's some good options here. Garrett Wilson's been making a ton of nice plays at Jets camp this year, up to this point so far. Allen Lazard, another player who there's a lot of buzz around right now, Austin, because of the vacancy at the wide receiver spot. Aaron Rodgers seems high on Allen Lazard, even jokingly called him a Hall of Fame type player. Obviously was being a little deceitful with that. Austin, is Lazard on your radar this year? We also see Trey Lance here if you wanted to use him as trade bait later.
Yeah, absolutely. I think Lazard is a guy that you have to consider, just because where are the Devontae Adams targets going? And to me, you're taking a little bit of a risk there, because maybe it's Christian Watson, maybe it's Lazard. Randall Cobb's gonna have to start seeing some more targets as well. There's a lot that needs to go into it. Romeo Doubs is also in the mix. So at that point, I'm not comfortable taking him there just yet. You can wait a little bit. But a player that was absolutely huge down the stretch was Rashad Penny last year. But you also have to consider, what does Kenneth Walker's role kind of fit in here? And is, Penny's workload going to be nearly as high as it was at the end of last season? So with all those things considered, you also have James Cook on the board, who could see a good amount of carries in Buffalo, which that's a messy backfield. We don't know exactly what's going to come out of that. Christian Kirk's another guy, like you just are highlighting now, where you could say this will be a number one wide receiver on a team this season, point blank. Doug Peterson, Trevor Lawrence, they're going to get him a ton of targets. I don't actually mind going in that direction. A lot of people are going to question it. Maybe we can hope that he stays and makes it back to us, but I don't know. I think I would take him. I would take him right here to ensure that we get him.
I think so as well. I think Christian Kirk is going to be Trevor Lawrence's favorite target. Last year, Laviska Shenault really struggled with drops throughout the season. And then we're at a spot now where if we're able to get the guy who's a number one target for a really good young QB, who I think is going to have another good season here where he takes a big step forward with Doug Peterson as the head coach, I think we're going to see a much better offense coming out of Jacksonville, as we see some really good options actually go off the board, including Sky Moore, who I was going to highlight here in a second. Saying that I would have really liked grabbing him in case something happens with Juju, whether he goes down with an injury, doesn't fit into Kansas City well then that means probably that Patrick Mahomes would have been throwing the ball to Sky Moore. I really like the idea of pairing backups together, because then that way if one goes down, the other guy's probably getting an extended role. So now here at this spot, Austin, we're looking for depth here at now. We've been able to get a flex guy in Christian Kirk. What do we want to go with here? Do you think it's important to get a backup QB now at this spot with Lamar Jackson? Do we think we need to touch running back depth, just given the fact that McCaffrey, J.K. Dobbins have been so injury prone? Where do you want to go?
Let's take a look at the running back spot. I think for sure with our back-to-back picks here, you need to consider a running back at some point. Now, these are a lot of guys that we're not exactly sure what the roles are going to be. Isaiah Spiller, big question mark. Ronald Jones, big question mark. Dameon Pierce, huge question mark. A lot of these guys, we don't know exactly what's going to happen. So if you go back up and look at the top players here, I think it's kind of interesting. Isaiah Spiller might have a pretty big role with the Chargers. Ronald Jones as well. We've seen with Kansas City, they are not afraid to rotate running backs and go to the hot hand, which Ronald Jones could be that. Dameon Pierce is another name we have to consider as well. This is a guy that doesn't have a ton of competition in that backfield in Houston. But I think with how much the Chargers are going to run the ball, I think it makes sense to take a guy like Isaiah Spiller, because I think that you will see Austin Eckler more in the passing game and, a lot of the actual rushing touches going to Isaiah Spiller.
Definitely would be interesting to see Isaiah Spiller take a big chunk of that rushing game there for the Los Angeles Chargers, a team that I think is going to be really, really good offensively this year. And with JC Jackson, that team's going to be getting extra offensive possessions with Mr. INT on the other side. Now here at this spot, we're in round 11. This is where it starts to thin out. We see a guy like Tyler Boyd, who's really fallen kind of out of favor there in Cincinnati. A few years ago was looked at as, maybe a guy you'd see go in the top 3 or 4 rounds of fantasy football. Now he's here in round 11. I'm not sure if I really want to touch him at this spot. There's also Marquez Valdes-Scantling, who's new to Kansas City. And then here's that Christian Watson piece, like you talked about, who could maybe emerge as the number one wide receiver in Green Bay after getting drafted in the second round out of North Dakota State University. What do you think here for Watson? Where do you want to go in round 11?
Round 11, I'm stuck between a guy like Watson and Pierce. Both are rookies, but I think could be high impact guys. The tough part is, do we feel comfortable enough with our running back depth with 2 guys coming off of major injuries in Christian McCaffrey and J.K. Dobbins? We need to be able to rotate a stable of running backs, to me, and I think that kind of forces our hand with this pick. As much as I'd love to take a guy like Christian Watson, I feel pretty good about that. But in that same breath, though, we also, we have a good stable of wide receivers. That makes it really tough with this pick. I think that you know what? Let's bank on the upside. Let's go with Christian Watson. Maybe he breaks out in Green Bay. Maybe Lazard ends up not being the guy, and then Watson could have that number one wide receiver potential.
That could be a huge steal. And with DeAndre Hopkins suspended, it definitely does give you another flex option, especially if Christian Watson gets going early. It gives you another guy to rely on. Maybe say Christian Kirk's not playing the best at the beginning of his time there. Maybe he has to work out some of that chemistry with Trevor Lawrence. Then you do have Christian Watson who can step in and maybe really fill that void that's going to be felt with DeAndre Hopkins on the suspended list. And now here we go. We're at this spot in round 12. Jacoby Myers, who's really famous for not catching touchdowns, is here. George Pickens, a young wide receiver who I think a lot of people are actually considering maybe as an offensive rookie of the year candidate, just with what we've seen out of Pittsburgh camp up to this point. DJ Chark I really like as well in Detroit, but I think we can wait a little bit on him. Then here's where we get into some running backs. Daryl Henderson, what's his role like with Cam Akers back? Marlon Mack, kind of an interesting player in Houston. Obviously, we know what he was in Indianapolis a few years ago. Austin, what are you looking at here for this spot?
So there's a couple of running backs I actually still like, which is good. We've kind of pushed it off a little bit here, but I think we should probably stick at that running back spot. Daryl Henderson had a massive role when Cam Akers was down, and he was a guy that, this Rams team could really trust. And I believe Daryl Henderson should be the pick. I think this is the clear and obvious pick with this one. And then now we jump back here with another selection. Do you consider another running back and have ultimate running back depth? Or do you go ahead and take a look at the whole field and say, well, maybe there's another guy out here that makes a little more sense?
Here's where we look at some Las Vegas running backs. We highlighted Josh Jacobs maybe being a little bit more of a concern going into this year. And here's some of the guys that could steal some of those carries. Zamir White, Kenyon Drake still there for another season. Do we look at those Las Vegas running backs and bank on the chance that, hey, maybe Josh Jacobs misses some time like he does every single year? Maybe we could use these guys in certain key situations when, it's a bye week for one of our running backs, or if there's an injury to one of our running backs. Could a Zamir White or Kenyon Drake be a good steal? Maybe, but it's a little early to pull anything like that at this point. We also have some QB still out here. And then also one player I really want to highlight, Noah Fant, who got traded to Seattle. We also have David Njoku here. Those are two younger tight ends who are fairly athletic, can make plays in the passing game. Of course, Fant, change of scenery, going to Seattle in that Russell Wilson trade. Austin, where's your kind of overall vibe on Noah Fant this season?
So Noah Fant is a guy I actually I'm excited about, but also I kind of pull myself back thinking, what was it like with Drew Lock and Noah Fant? It wasn't great. Let's be honest with ourselves. It really wasn't great. And this offense is going to be worse than it was in Denver. So with that being said, he could also see quite a few targets. So, the touchdowns I'm not super excited about. They have it projected at 3 touchdowns. I think that's fair. I don't think their offense is going to move enough where he's going to score a ton of touchdowns, but I think we do need to get an established backup tight end, and there becomes a big drop-off point. So I think Noah Fant or Njoku are super conducive options, but Fant to me should be the favorite here.
All right, Noah Fant, welcome to the squad. We're glad to have you in here. Now we see a little bit of a run on defense here. We have the Ravens go, Bills, Rams as well. Maybe it would have been the right time to look at that defensive side of the ball, Austin. I want to know here, what do you really like to look at when it comes to the defense kicker? Do you like to kind of be patient and pick toward the middle of those, or do you like to be the trendsetter and try and go get one early?
Yeah, so generally for me, I try to pick out value ones because I do try to take other positions first. However, that's burned me in the past. It really has, but it's also really helped me pick up some good depth. So depending on how you look at it, you could become a trendsetter, but we're too late to become that. So at this point in the draft, we might as well wait. Let's let the field play to us because we weren't able to acquire a top defense. So what does that mean for us? Likely, I know Sheldon, me and you have done this in the past. We stream defenses, we stream kickers. That's not something we're afraid to do. So I think now at this juncture, you can kind of look at it and say, all right, we have Lamar Jackson as our quarterback. Do we need to be ready to go for if he actually goes down? And a player I really like that should have a massive impact is Jameis Winston. Jameis Winston is that quarterback that could have a huge jump this season, and I think we should seriously consider taking him.
I think Jameis, last year really showcased that before that catastrophic injury that, of course, prematurely ended his season. It was a really sad time there in New Orleans once Jameis Winston went down. But like you said, I think he's the guy here. Now, Sean Payton stepping down, does that concern you at all here, Austin?
I think it does a little bit, but I think a lot of the main pieces are still intact. And Michael Thomas coming back is going to be absolutely huge for them. Chris Olave entering the chat. That's another big deal. So you add 2 primary playmakers to a team that did not have a single perimeter playmaker all season, Marquez Callaway being the only guy that they could trust in any capacity, which is brutal. Give me Jameis Winston.
I like that. Here we have our backup QB now at this spot, and we go into round 15 here, which is actually the final round. So we have an extra bench depth, but that's okay because remember, we're going to stream our kickers. At this point, this gives us time up until week 1 to, really reevaluate the situation. maybe there's reports that come out that say Daryl Henderson's not going to get very many carries this year, or, you know, whatever the case is. Maybe in your league, you're going to be able to put DeAndre Hopkins on IR with the suspension. So you have options here where you could just be able to pick up somebody. Now at this spot, Austin, Younghoe Koo's out here. He's, of course, led the league in fantasy scoring as a kicker before, but this is a different Atlanta offense now at this point. Probably don't expect him to do this. McManus is a player that I think could be interesting here. So looking at the defensive options here as well, we've got Green Bay, Denver, New England, Indianapolis. What are you looking at now at this spot?
Yeah, for me personally, I think that you have to consider, either way. I kind of like Will Lutz as well. That's not a guy that I would shy away from. That New Orleans offense should be scoring quite a few points. They should be moving the ball, but I think McManus makes a lot of sense. I mean, with Russell Wilson at the helm, to me, it makes too much sense. This could be a high-scoring offense in a very, very competitive and tough AFC West, but that should mean there's a lot of high-scoring games where they got to duke it out with all those other powers.
It seems like all those really close games always come down to a field goal at the end. We get Brandon McManus here now to be our place kicker for our fantasy team. Of course, we do not have a defense, but again, going in toward week one, you'd be able to make a decision on really what you want. So let's overview our roster again real quick. Lamar Jackson, our starting QB, feel really, really good about that one. Then at the running back spots, we got McCaffrey, J.K. Dobbins. I expect those two guys to have monster years coming back healthy, hopefully this season. CeeDee Lamb, A.J. Brown. Again, I think we got a really good wide receiver duo here. And as long as our running backs stay healthy, I feel like the top 5 players here on our roster are really poised for championship level success. Dawson Knox, Juju Smith-Schuster, DeAndre Hopkins, pretty good collection from the tight end to flex positions. McManus as our kicker, of course, will be streamlining defense. And then off the bench, we got Christian Kirk, Isaiah Spiller, Christian Watson, Daryl Henderson, Noah Fant, and Jameis Winston as our backup signal caller. So I feel really good here about what we got, Austin. Overall, if you had to grade this draft with hindsight now, what would you grade yourself?
Yeah, overall, I mean, the only kind of mistake you make is not having a defense. But once again, you can look at the bottom 3 on your bench and say, okay, which of these guys is really not going to have an impact? We might have some more information come out on, you know, in Green Bay, what's going on with Christian Watson, what his role is. Maybe Daryl Henderson ends up, you know, being the RB3. Who knows? There's a lot that can happen. Noah Fant historically has gotten hurt. So once again, maybe he goes down, or maybe one of our players goes down, move him to IR, and then you get that open roster spot.
Right. There's a lot of options here. Overall, I feel like this is a really good draft, and I think showcased a lot of the strengths and also the weakness of being pick number 2 as well. Let us know in the comment section what you thought of our fantasy mock draft here. Hit subscribe to the channel so you don't miss out on any of our other content as well. Again, this is going to be a few big weeks here coming up in terms of the content coming out, both NBA, NFL related stuff. So make sure you guys are subscribed for that. And until next time, we'll catch you in the very next Utility Sports video.